at ASH Scotland to speak to us about smoking, stress and the lifestyle choice.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning. I think it's still morning. Time is down here. Delighted to be here and the chance to speak to you all. I work for Action on Smoking and Health Scotland. I would imagine most of you will know one of the ASH organisations. We have sister organisations in London and Cardiff and Belfast, Dublin and various other places as well. But what we are is as ASH Scotland, the national charity in Scotland that works to reduce the harm and the inequality that's caused by tobacco use. So I'm coming much more from a policy and advocacy perspective. I'm not a researcher, but we do try as much as we can to make sure that the policy and advocacy work we do is based in the best available research and knowledge that we have. So it's always a pleasure to come and engage with people like yourselves and to learn what's happening in other fields. So when we talk about smoking and the idea of smoking being a lifestyle choice, and I don't believe it is, and the links with smoking and stress, which are strong and pervasive. So to begin with, just a bit of historical background. Smoking has long been presented as a means of stress relief, and something that's going to make you happy to the extent that you will dance around in a very poorly clad kind of way. The tobacco industry put a lot of time and energy into presenting smoking as being a stress relief, something that's going to make you feel better and help you cope with the difficulties of life. Now obviously, they're not allowed to advertise anymore, and we are deprived of these marvellous images, but it's awful hard to get rid of that kind of idea. This idea is deeply ingrained and very difficult to shift. So this was just yesterday in the Daily Mail. We learned the important information that Samantha Cameron has been so stressed by recent political events that she's been back on the ciggies as a way of helping her to cope with being married to a man who's under a lot of stress and strain in his job. And interestingly, I've taken this as a screen grab from the Twitter feed of Forest. Some of you may know the freedom organisation for the right to enjoy smoking tobacco. That name is not chosen by accident, and this is an organisation that is paid for by tobacco companies to present, as they put it, the case for smokers, but basically the lifestyle choice model of smoking. So deeply ingrained idea, very difficult to get hold of. It's something we've certainly found. We've just been running a project where we've done a lot of qualitative interviews with people who have been using mental health support services, and we find continually coming back from people as, I smoke because I use it for stress relief, I rely on it, I need it. And it's out there and very strongly ingrained. And I think it is so enduring and robust because it does actually tally very closely with people's day-to-day experience. People are generally not daft. They feel stressed, they have a fag, they feel better. That is their day-to-day perception. And so we have to take that, I think, as our starting point. But I would say that relief from nicotine withdrawal symptoms is not the same as helping people with any underlying stress or anxiety issues. And in fact, what's often happening is that nicotine addiction is adding a new boom and bust cycle on top of any underlying issues that people have. So they are addicted to nicotine, which is a fantastically addictive substance, particularly when presented through smoked tobacco. It's as addictive as heroin. Any period without nicotine results in stresses and anxiety building up withdrawal symptoms, which are relieved by having another cigarette. So the day-to-day experience is indeed of smoking as a means of dealing with stress and anxiety, but it is also a means of creating it too. And I think this is a great part of the support of tolerance for smoking that exists even amongst people who really should know better. And it was back in 2004, but I still use the quote from John Reid, who was at the time the Secretary of State for Health, saying that the only enjoyment sometimes people have is to have a cigarette. He was referring particularly to people in lower socioeconomic groups. And an extraordinary thing for a Secretary of State for Health to say, but the idea of this is something that we should leave people with because it helps them and they enjoy it. And that's an idea that we are still fighting against and we still come up against a lot in terms of frontline services and anti-poverty groups and community organisations. In our line of work, this is still a barrier that we face all the time, is that you're trying to take away something people need and something that people enjoy. And I think that doesn't work on either level. First of all, we now have very good research about whether this is something that people need and which benefits them. So smoking is associated with lower levels of pleasure, poor overall quality of life. Smoking is associated not just with poor health, but actually with feeling less well. And that's in the holistic sense, rather than just the having trouble climbing up the stairs. Stopping smoking is associated with as much benefit to mood and anxiety disorders as taking antidepressants. So smoking is not something that in the bigger picture, if you take a step back, is helping people, whatever the day-to-day experience is. And we now have very good and robust evidence on that. I would question too whether it's something people enjoy and choose to do. Now there are informed adults who choose to smoke tobacco, but I would suggest that those people are not typical of the smoking population and in fact very, very far from it. Now all the figures I have are figures from Scotland, because I didn't bother myself to get any other figures, but my understanding is that they're all very typical of the figures in England as well. So we know that most people who smoke started as children. About 2/3 of people started to smoke before the age of 18. Almost nobody starts to smoke after the age of 25. This is a habit, an addiction that has begun in childhood. We know that most people then go on to regret that decision. Most people who smoke say that they want to stop, but they don't stop for a variety of different reasons. We know that the smoking rate is 4 times higher in the most disadvantaged areas than in the most advantaged areas. So this is very much skewed in the population. We know certainly in Scotland that half of those people with a registered disability or who are unemployed and seeking work smoke. So a very, very skewed population. The smoking rate in Scotland amongst prisoners is about 75%. And about 1/3 of tobacco across the UK is actually used by people with mental health problems. This is not a picture of a freely entered into consumer lifestyle choice. This is a picture of people using smoking as a response to the socio-economic circumstances that they find themselves in. So I reject entirely the idea of the freedom organisation, the right to enjoy smoking tobacco, as being representative of smokers. It is perhaps representative of a small group of smokers, but it is very far away from the mainstream smoking experience. So what do we do? I think first of all we have to reject any narrative that blames people for perceived poor lifestyle choices. And I think one of the barriers we do still come across with people talking about smoking is they don't want to blame people for living in poverty, or they don't want to blame people for their poor health. Absolutely we shouldn't do that. But we can talk about tobacco use as a problem without doing that. And we have to be very clear, this isn't about blaming people for having an addiction that they do not wish to have. Our approach to addressing tobacco use should not be about prohibition or punishment, but actually looking at the culture, the context in which people are smoking, looking at what's driving them to smoke, and looking to see if there are alternatives that can be provided instead. And so I would suggest that a fair and compassionate approach actually requires that we address the factors that lead particular groups to smoke more, and makes it harder for those groups to stop smoking, because that is clearly the issue that we have to address. So smoking is then a vicious cycle. You have people experiencing greater stresses and strains in their lives. That makes them vulnerable to smoking. It makes them more likely to reach out for a coping mechanism, but that actually makes their circumstances worse. It does increase stress, it increases financial difficulties, it increases poor health. All of those things lead people back into smoking more. So we have to break that vicious cycle. To put that into a little bit of structure, this is a diagram that colleagues at Health Scotland have produced. They talk of the fundamental causes of poverty, which are employment situations, taxation, macroeconomic, political decisions. The environmental influences and the individual experiences that people then have, such as the learning environment, services that are provided, the social networks that they have, and all of that leading into the effects of inequality in finances, in health, and in well-being generally. Smoking is not one of the fundamental causes of poverty. and we accept that. But it is actually quite an important part of the environmental influences and the individual experience that help to make that link between the fundamental causes of poverty and translate those things into actual harm for people. So I understand when people say to us, actually no, we shouldn't worry about these lifestyle issues, we should actually focus on the fundamental things that cause poverty. I can see where they're coming from, but while we're doing that, there is still an awful lot that we can do to interfere in the processes that translate those causes actually into the harm that people experience. And I don't find people saying, oh, well, those food banks, we shouldn't bother with them because they don't deal with the fundamental causes of poverty. I mean, people accept that they're actually helping to mitigate the impacts of it. And I don't hear people saying, well, those payday lenders with the extortionate loan rates, we'll just let them go because they're not the fundamental cause of poverty. And I'd like to see people looking at tobacco in the way that we look at payday lenders as being an exploitative industry that preys on vulnerable people and makes things worse for them. If there are ways that we can regulate that, change the culture, and make sure that people don't need to rely on those things, we will have a real impact on people's well-being. And in practice, what that means, well, the sympathetic approach means we have to have the carrot as well as the stick. And a concern for me is that the big policy driver that we have in terms of tobacco is high price. And high price is really important in terms of driving down tobacco use, but it's a very blunt instrument. Because while that makes an enormous benefit for the people who do stop smoking because they can't afford to do it and they manage to quit, for the majority of people, each time you put up the price in the budget, the majority of smokers don't quit, and it does make things worse for them. So we need to put high prices as part of a wider package that actually provides the support and the encouragement and different means by which we help people to find the exit, the escape route that the high price is driving them towards. We need, for example, to have a clear lead from mental health services and an acceptance that smoking is a coping mechanism that people are using, but a particularly harmful one. And accepting that the high smoking rate amongst people with mental health issues is part of the package of issues and problems that that population is having to deal with, and should not be tolerated, as it too often is, as one of the ways by which people get through the day. I would like to see, for example, financial support services, citizens advice bureaus, money advice services, food banks, talking to people about their smoking behaviours. And we've done some research with some money advice services in Scotland where we found that advisors were reluctant to do that. That was seen to be interfering in people's private lives and their choices, seemed to be blaming them for the financial difficulties they were having. But actually, when we trained up advisors to speak to people about smoking, surprise, surprise, we found that people knew how much money they were spending on smoking. They were happy to have the conversation, but what they needed was the support to actually make the change that was going to make the difference. So our work at the moment is largely about trying to get a compassionate discussion about smoking, a supportive discussion about smoking, out across that wide range of frontline services who are helping and engaging with people, but very often at the moment not actually talking about tobacco for a variety of reasons. And where we're taking this is, I think, learning from disability organisations, and I'm quite struck at the way that many disability organisations that we have spoken to reject this medical model of disability. So you can't get into the building because you're in a wheelchair and you can't get up the steps. You can turn that around into a social model. You can't get into the building because somebody's put steps in front of the building. Maybe if we didn't have the steps, you would be able to get into the building. So looking at the context in which people are making their decisions and living their lives, I'd like to do that with tobacco. And instead of saying you're being silly, you shouldn't smoke, you should save your money and spend it on something else, or you should feel better by not smoking, we can look at the context in society that's driving people to smoke, that's making it more difficult to stop, and take that as our approach and see if that can actually help people more. I'll finish almost exactly on time then, I think, and say that social model is something that we are looking to take out for discussion with people. It's absolutely untried and untested at the moment, but I'm very keen to have discussions like this and to get people's feedback as to how that might actually work, and indeed what you think it is actually useful.